Welcome to the Therapist Uncut podcast, where off-the-clock therapists who happen to be friends share their uncensored thoughts about real life. Join us weekly in spreading positivity and making mental health relatable through casual conversation, inspirational stories, and real talk with friends who happen to be therapists. Please welcome your co-hosts, Nikki Young, Jolene Daly, and Alyssa Nahara.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another week and another episode of Therapist Uncut. We are a group of off-the-clock therapists who happen to be good friends as well. I am Nikki, and I am here with Jolene and Alyssa.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. If you have not noticed, we are talking about Rona. Continue, Nikki.
We are three therapists, three very competent, successful therapists, but we are humans too, and we want you to see that side of us. And we want to destigmatize mental health by making it just a normal part of everyday life.
And helping you guys de-stress too.
And this helps us de-stress. Let's be real.
It really is. This is how we're coping with the situation. Y'all are along for the ride.
Thanks for participating in our self-care.
If you have not yet, be sure to hit subscribe and follow us for our upcoming episodes as well. If you haven't checked out our first episodes, feel free to revisit those. We also talked about Rona then, a little bit about self-care, what we're doing to hang in there.
We also told you a little bit about us. We are each providers in the community. We each own and operate a small business, and we are really excited about what we do, and we're excited to share it with you guys.
We are back together to talk about mental health, and I am probably the one that's a little more serious most of the time. Rona is splitting the country.
It's true. It's like politics, only it's a virus.
Yeah.
It's like not politics. It's like an election. It's like an election year, only it's a virus that's accomplishing all of this.
Right.
That's so true. I will tell you, in our household, we have differing political views in our household alone. And there are moments where I just have to say, I hear you, but I just need a break right now. We can come back to this another day when I feel like I have the energy. And then there's those conversations where it's not very composed, right? People are attacking each other and yelling, and you've got people all up in heated debates on social media. And it's intense. Mm-hmm. Totally intense.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have the same viewpoint as me for me to respect yours. And I think that that's what the nation and I don't know if it's a world issue or an us issue, but
mm-hmm. So it's almost like when people are disagreeing now, they're debating to try to convince the other party that they are correct, when really we need to be having a dialogue, not so much debating to change somebody else's opinion or perspective or worldview, but to hear each other out, because there's not just one perspective in this world right now.
Oh, I think we've all been there, and I try and catch myself if I'm ever in that situation. But I can think of one friendship that I've had throughout my life where one of my best friends and our views completely different on many topics, but I absolutely love our conversations, because when we do come together, we're not trying to convince the other person that they're wrong, right? I'm not trying to convince him that he's a conspiracy theorist on all accounts and he's wrong on everything, and vice versa. When we come together, we're genuinely intrigued by what the other person is thinking about this, right? Like, oh, hey, I just heard or saw or read this. I'm curious what you're thinking about it. And usually by the end of it, we're in the middle, right? I can get down behind a good conspiracy theory. So usually by the end of it, he's, convinced me that it's plausible, and I've tamed him down a little bit, but those conversations are where I think where growth and unity occur, because you're coming with an open mind and open spirit and open thoughts. And
you're totally learning from each other.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
That openness is allowing that learning opportunity to happen.
Asking questions. I cannot stand when somebody assumes. I play the devil's advocate. I've done that for years. I'll play whatever side you're not. BBP. That's, I can say that.
Hashtag BBP. We got hashtags left and right, guys.
Oh, hashtag
proud.
BB
proud. Can we do BB
got
proud
it.
though? I like BB proud.
BB proud.
BB proud. Oh, I
Yeah,
like that. It's
good.
easier to say.
So BBP, yes, absolutely. being curious about what the other person is saying and not making assumptions. And just because somebody is for doing one thing, opening the county or opening the country, does not mean that they're, wanting people to get sick.
Bringing in therapy background here, there's an approach to couples therapy that I really use a lot in session, Gottman, and a big piece of his work is that you're not always going to agree on everything. So not every problem is a solvable problem. We're not ever going to have a country full of Americans that agree on every issue, and that's not bad. That's a good thing, right? And in my opinion, that is good that we don't agree on everything. But it's how we communicate about it that makes the difference.
How we agree to disagree.
Exactly.
If you disagree and want to shut somebody down, that's really invalidating that whole person. And I am for plan your own path, find your own path, do your own thing, be you. Those are all statements that I really can stand behind because we're all individuals. I don't want to be somebody else.
Jolene, I hate to cut you off, but you said individuals. Yep. And earlier in our previous podcast, you talked a little bit about this. Somehow we tend to forget the individuals. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
We make a lot of assumptions. Everything goes back to assumptions. Stop making assumptions and talk to people about things. Again, going back to me being a devil's advocate, you could assume one thing about me. And if you actually just ask me, you might be totally different. It could be a totally different response or anybody else.
You know what happens when you make an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think I know what's coming.
You make an ass out of you and out of me.
So that being said, one of the things that I've learned about myself is I want to start asking more questions. I want to start getting a different side of what's going on with people because I want people to do that with me.
So how do we avoid forgetting the individual, but still approach community building? I know we talked a little bit about the in this together concept versus we're all in the same storm, but in a different boat. And we also talked about our little yachts and our little paper boats. If you guys didn't listen to that episode, go back and listen to that one. That was a fun one. So how do we do this, but also promote community at the same time?
I think respect is a key word. And I don't think it's enough to say that just respect. I think we have to define what that looks like and make it a verb, really, instead of just a noun. But to me, that word has always embodied what it looks like to have different opinions and to still get along and to still work towards, I guess, the greater good and individual good. So I think we have to find a way to take action on that word.
Where have you guys seen just some really cool examples of people doing great stuff, like creative, unthinkable stuff that you wouldn't even have thought of that is really supporting and building communities?
So my family, we live in close proximity and have been social distance singing for the neighbors on Saturday evenings. So we'll go out and sit together and have a guitar and sing for the neighbors, and people will stop as they walk by if the dogs don't bark at them and come together that way.
Have you had any people like drive up through your neighborhood just to watch you guys and listen? Because I don't live in your neighborhood, but that sounds cool.
Our neighborhood does something similar. We call it Honk Fest. Our neighbor next door actually started it, and she's gone through and, I mean, as far as put flyers, a few blocks away. It started, I think we've done it twice now, and it started out as just a select few of us who live close by and really know each other pretty well, sitting out in front of our houses and in our driveways and just hanging out from a physical distancing perspective. And then a bunch of neighbors were driving by. We all had signs, right? Like the kids had signs like, you honk, we dance, you honk, we cheer. There was definitely a couple you honk, we drink signs, and just the neighborhood coming together. And so many neighbors that were driving by wanted to participate that they actually reached out to her and said, you got to do this again. We want to come. So she did. She planned and organized another one. But this time, neighbors, I don't know, several blocks away, probably the next zip code over, saw the flyers. And there are a couple of musicians, and they offered to come play. So very similar. They brought all their equipment, set up in one of the neighbors' yards and played some music. And I absolutely know that every person present for that did not have the same exact views on Corona and how to manage it, and what should come next and all of that. I mean, you could tell just by watching how close people are standing, right? In terms of how seriously someone might take this or what individual factors might come into play. But everybody's just getting along, having a good time, hanging out with each other, getting to know people on a personal level. And it's a good time.
I live in the country, so I don't have any really good neighbor stories where we're all coming together because our neighbors are kind of far. But I will say that we've been going on a lot of walks. I know we mentioned walks in our previous episode around self-care, and we've been doing a lot of walks around the property. And last night on our walk, as we hit the divider between our property and our neighbor's property, our neighbor happened to be outside. And I absolutely feel like you should know your neighbors. And I do know my neighbors. I just haven't seen my neighbors probably since, and I'm 32, so probably since I was like in my early 20s. It has been a long time since I've seen my neighbors. So we all hung out. They were on their property, we were on our property, and we just caught up. And it was cool. I was like, oh my gosh, how's your daughter? How's your son? What's going on? And our family members are all chatting it up. And it's just things that you wouldn't expect to happen are now happening. And there's a lot of not good stuff happening right now, but there's also a lot of good stuff that's happening. Our son's actually a high school senior. He'll be graduating this year. And there's also a recent group that was developed for adopting a senior graduate. And you basically just post your kiddo on this group, whether they're going to this district or they're in a private or a charter school. You post your grad and everybody just goes through and I want to adopt him. I would love to send him or her a gift. So that was really cool too. And again, very creative.
It has been cool to see how the community has stepped up for seniors, even for 8th graders, for anybody that's missing out on a major life event because of Rona. I know I've seen, and I actually was a little confused in the beginning. I was like, why are there suddenly teddy bears in windows? But then the more I noticed it, I actually looked into it, and someone somewhere started that whole, I don't know what they're calling it, but find a teddy bear, something for kids to do when you go out and drive around, putting teddy bears in their window. Chalk the Walk was one that I also heard of. Jolene's looking a little confused. Chalk the Walk is basically where you go out in your driveway and you just write chalk messages to people so you can drive around and
That's
and
nice.
read different things. I also saw that somebody had done it to, I think it was a police station. People went and just wrote a bunch of messages to the law enforcement officers, or maybe it was a fire department, one of those two.
Really cool. And I will say too, all these people who are learning, or maybe they've already been talented, I don't know what you call a sewer, somebody who sews, and they're using the talent to help support people, or people like me. I don't sew very well, but I'm totally open to learning, and we have good friends that can teach us. So there are people who are using their talents to help support others. And I know that there was a lot, especially in the beginning, there was a lot of offices that didn't have masks, that didn't have a way to really protect themselves, and now they're just getting floods of donations to help support that.
They would be called seamstress.
Thanks.
So you know.
Seamstresses. Now is that a gender neutral term? A seamstress?
I believe it is a gender neutral term.
All of our seamstresses out there, thank you. All the people that were hanging out in like an hour, 2-hour long line outside of Joann's or Michael's to get their material. I remember seeing a bunch of pictures of those on Facebook and on social media. So thank you.
I don't like social media. I'm not going to pretend like I love social media. I am currently on social media primarily for the business aspect, although I do love seeing the things like Nikki's talking about, the celebration of the police officers or the fire department, or there's been a couple of videos where people are parked in hospitals parking lots singing or playing songs for the hospital staff. That's really cool.
Can I tell you guys what I'm super excited about?
Yeah.
The comeback of drive-ins. Yes.
Yes.
So excited about that.
Someone we used to work with, their daughter turned 18, and rather than just let it go by unobserved, they went. Somebody must have had some property, and so they strung up a projection screen, and all her friends showed up in their respective vehicles, and they had a good old-fashioned drive-through birthday party.
I love it. I've been seeing those pop up state theaters. I've seen one at a casino, wherever they have the property and the means to do it, and people are showing up, and you bring your own food, and it's just such a great way to stay connected and watch a great movie. So I'm really excited about drive-ins. I hope those stay in.
All right, so Alyssa's really excited about drive-ins, and she lives in the country.
Are either of you actually old enough to remember the series Drive-In?
Slightly. I went there I went there a handful of times before they shut it down.
Okay.
But yes.
So speaking of drive-in movie theaters, so my grandma, I love this woman to death, but growing up, she was very prim and proper, right? This particular grandma is not somebody that you would have gone to share anything that, was maybe a little bit pushing the boundaries or anything like that. She was always put together.
Is this Grandma Ethel?
No.
Oh.
No. Different grandmother.
Grandma. Okay.
Yes. But then probably a handful of years ago, this grandma started to come out of her shell. And I love it. Like, we are so much closer now than we ever were, just because she's so much more real now. And so many stories have come out of this woman's mouth in the last couple of years that just, my cousins and I are sitting there with our jaws on the floor like, you did what? Like, you, of all people, you did this. And one of the stories that she was sharing, and I'm talking, church choir director, just the whole 9 yards, right? Apparently she used to sneak a bunch of her friends into the drive-in movie theater stuffed in the trunk, like 9-10 people just shoved in the trunk. Yeah, back in the day.
What kind of car did she drive?
I don't know.
How do you
guys not know these stories?
Negative.
I'm really disappointed.
I've never stuffed people in my trunk.
No, I understand these stories. I just never expected that from this particular relative. Okay. I was very proud that,
You had a significantly different grandmother than I did. Because my first visual of the male anatomy was a Pictionary game with my family, and my grandmother drew.
Oh my God.
How accurate was it?
I don't know. We were, again, very sheltered. So that I don't know. But we were also told we had to turn away. There were several of us cousins that were like, oh my God, grandma's drawing, turn away.
I love how all these years later, you still have a play-by-play of what that game night was like.
Yes. Oh, yes. So this is really good. Different grandmothers. Is it that you are just now hearing the stories and being connected with this grandmother, Nikki? Or is it that, going back to that, remembering the individual, is it that you're just now getting to know her, really her as an adult, where you can?
No, I think she's just now allowing herself to be herself. Yeah, and to share. I think she grew up in that era, and that the community that she lived in was very much about outward appearances and being put together 100% all the time. And I don't think she ever allowed herself to. I mean, obviously back in the day she did, but then in her adult life, all of her stories from being, even in college, awesome stories. And I think for a long time, she just didn't allow herself to maybe express herself fully. And now she's owning it, and it's so much fun. Yeah, we're having a grand old time.
So in a nutshell, be you. And then I have a good friend of mine that is always like, do you, boo, do you? And I'm like, okay, I could do this. I just need to hear it from you. So message, right? Like, be you.
I feel like that you're onto something there. Back, if we're relating this back to our last episode, instead of self-care, do you?
I could do it. Like, Jolene's shaking her head. Okay.
No, yeah.
I'm still open to suggestions. I think do you is a good contender.
Yeah.
So long as it's safe and healthy, guys. Let's do you in a safe and healthy way.
Sometimes we don't do those safe and healthy things. That's how people pack on the Rona 19.
I don't care what your beliefs are, right? Like, I guess I shouldn't say clearly, because Jolene talked about not making assumptions, but I love ladies, specifically one lady, my wife, but
that's a better clarification.
I love a lady. But I don't care what your beliefs are, right? Like, I completely respect you if you don't agree with, as people call it, my lifestyle, but if you don't agree with who I am and it doesn't fit within if you walk your own talk, I got no problem with it.
Oh, it's so easy to go there. And you just have to make such a conscious effort not to go there. I don't get this as much anymore. And I don't know, maybe I'm looking older. But I remember Nikki talking about how Nikki apparently looks like she's 12. I don't think so, but maybe it's because I know Nikki. But Nikki looks very young, and people
because I'm so mature. You know, my wise old spirit.
Your wise soul. Your wise soul. I feel like for a really long time, people assumed that I was really young and then associated that with my level of competence. I remember being going out into a home one day, and I was doing my social work job of assessing for safety and assessing for risk. And whom I was speaking with, who was a parent, had gotten very flustered with me in my presence, which I get. Like, I'm a government agency walking into your house. And she said something about, I have all these other things going on, and I'm in escrow right now. And then all these things rattled off. And then she comes back to me and says, do you even know what escrow is? Like, what? Are you talking to me? That was it. And so the judgment that comes with your age, your culture, your religious beliefs, your sexuality, your political views, or whatever it may be, it's so easy for that door to like flood open. But we really got to keep it as controlled as possible and check yourself when you find that judgy part coming out, because it's not cool.
And we got to be nice to ourselves too. So something you were saying really rung true. Like the sexuality piece, I didn't really care, right? It's not something that's ever necessarily been something that I'm self-conscious about for the most part. But I think that's because I've had such a supportive group of peers. But the age thing, like I noticed myself having, as you guys know, Stacey and I recently launched a private practice. That's something that's been, I've got big dreams. Small business, big dreams has become my hashtag because
shout out to the big dreamers out there.
Yeah.
There you go.
And I know there's 3 of us right here, and I have some really big ideas on how to bring certain practices and services to our area. And I have had these ideas for years now, but I have held back in that. How does anybody get to, I realize I've held back in that when somebody looks at me, I mean, because the plans I have, they involve getting high level officials on board. Who's going to take me seriously when everybody thinks I'm 12? Right. So in my head, I've told myself, well, let's just postpone this for a year, 2 years, 3 years until I look like an adult. And then, maybe I'll have more of a platform to stand on. But yeah. So that's something that I realized in myself within the last year, is that I was, I guess, not being accepting of myself and my baby face. Just got to own it. Yeah.
Yes, you have to, because you're going to want that. You're not going to want to be 45 and look 45. You're going to want to be 45 and look younger.
That's so true. I guess. Yeah.
So listen to these words, Nikki, because I've had to tell them to myself too.
Okay.
You are never too young to build an empire. You are never too old to follow a dream.
There's big things coming from all of us. It's happening, guys.
Back to whatever we were talking about. Where were we going?
Judgment.
Yes.
We're talking about judgment and Rona and the judgment that goes along with Rona, and the fact that just because somebody doesn't wear a mask and somebody doesn't mean that one is right or the other. They're doing them. Be you. Do you.
Do you, boo.
Last episode we talked about what we miss with Rona and what we're doing as forms of do you care. Something I can do now is go to the lake and go snowboarding. Those are 2 big outlets. But I grew up on the water, family, close friends. We all spent a lot of time out on the lake. And I'm Greek, but you would never know. Like, my mom is Caucasian and my father is Greek, and I'm whiter than my mom.
So, community coming together, Rona, respect. Those are all really good words to remember. So I'm looking forward to really doing anything.
I think I miss being surrounded by people. So I don't necessarily want to go to a giant party where I have to interact with all of those people, but I miss people being around. So I think that's what I miss, walking into a restaurant and hearing people talking and saying hi to, the waiter, the waitress, or the bartender that from down the street, and just sitting there, just, with your small group or individual person that you're there with, but just hearing life around you.
Yeah.
You know what's actually really beautiful is about 2 weeks ago, we went on a hike, and by we I mean Anthony and I and our kids. We went on a hike, and this was the first time that we'd actually really gotten out. Um, so we got there and we're unloading, and as we're driving, you can see more and more little families kind of pulled over on the side of the road or parked in the parking lot. And literally, that life was so beautiful to see. Watching people laugh and smile and hearing somebody else's voice in real life that wasn't your family members. And as we were getting ready and unloading, a Harley drove by real slow because it's a real nice area. And you can hear him and his passenger talking. And they even said, "It's so nice to see people out," as they're talking over all their loud Harley noises. And I could hear it clearly. And that was one of the most like beautiful, mindful moments I had during all of this. You're absolutely right. It is so good to see people out.
We've gotten to the point where in Rona and missing life and society and not necessarily interacting, just being in and hearing has become kind of a somber, sad situation that we will eventually move through and get to a better point.
We are so happy that you joined our podcast today. Please hit subscribe if you have not yet done so, and join us back next week for our next episode. This is Therapist Uncut. You guys have a great day.
Thank you for joining Therapist Uncut, a production of AMP Smart Business. To learn more about Therapist Uncut and stay up on upcoming episodes, please subscribe and follow us on social media. As a reminder, although the Therapist Uncut co-hosts are licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to substitute professional mental health counseling. If you need professional therapy, please contact your local provider or primary care provider. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Therapist Uncut.